just went out this past weekend to a nice little track of Pennsylvania State Forest to do some camping with Connor, Sammy's brother. And we just had an absolute great time. Spent some time in the hot tent, built a fire, cooked some food on the fire. Oh, man, it was so much fun. That video is coming out this Friday, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But what I want to talk about is the history of the state forest here in Pennsylvania, because, I spend so much time in these state forests, so much time recreating, camping, fishing, hiking, hunting, all of that stuff. And I thought that it would make sense to kind of share how we got to the point where we can enjoy these rights on this public land here in Pennsylvania. And it's a little bit different than how the national forests are set up. Kind of the same premise, really focused around conservation. But the biggest thing is that this was like a Pennsylvania initiative. This wasn't something that was mandated by the federal government or anything like that. This was Pennsylvania that was like, hey, we have these resources. We need to make sure that we protect them. So we're going to start way back. And I have, Pennsylvania's document right here to share a couple stories and things for you guys to really understand what it is that we're talking about and why we got to where we are today. So let's get right into it here. This story starts way back whenever people first started settling here in Pennsylvania. So this was back in 1681. William Penn recognized the value of Pennsylvania State Forest. He saw the vast amount of land and the vast amount of woods that Pennsylvania offered. And I'm not just talking woods like, the forest. I'm talking about like wood, the amount of trees, how big these trees were. He was like, holy crap, there is so much wood here. Definitely a resource worth protecting. And he actually issued a chapter of rights, which is basically like kind of like a rule order for the colonists to leave 1 acre of trees for every 5 acres of land cleared. Now, a lot of people did not follow this rule. People were trying to make a living. They were trying to scratch out, what they could from the land and just survive. So a lot of the time that was not followed. But the woods remained relatively intact until about the 1850s, whenever, much of the American economy in the 19th century was based off of forest products. Like the demands for lumber were just so high. Historians estimate that every iron furnace, there were about 145 in 1850, needed between 20,000 and 35,000 acres of forest to sustain it throughout the course of its lifetime. That's a lot of forest. That's a lot of acreage that was at that time completely covered with old growth forest. So you're not talking about the trees. You think about today, 20,000 to 35,000 acres, the trees today would not have been even close to the amount that they needed, just because these forests were so old and these trees were so big that, you're getting 5, 10, 15 times the amount of lumber yield per tree back then, whenever these forests were very much old and, like really, really freaking huge, honestly. Another thing that was really important was hemlock bark. It was the primary source of tannin for the leather industry. So whenever long hunters were going out, and long hunters is a completely different story that I'll cover another time, but I'll give you a little bit of a rundown. So the long hunters were folks back then that would leave their families, leave towns for months, years at a time, and go collect deer hides out in the woods whenever the deer population was absolutely thriving in the eastern part of the United States. So they would go out, they would collect these hides in the summer, they would shave them down, and then they would tan them and send them back. And, whenever people say like a buck, like that's like the slang for like $1 a buck, that came from buck hides. So buck hides usually cost around $1. at that time, which was crazy money back then. I mean, that's a lot of money for one single hide. So that's kind of where that term came from, and that's what a lot of people did. And those hides needed to be tanned, and the best way to tan them was hemlock bark. So that's where a lot of the forest for hemlock went into, like a lot of hemlock production, hemlock woods, got cut down, used for tannins. Now, with all of this wood production, the need for wood, the need for bark, the need for lumber to build houses, to tan hides, things like that, became the need for sawmills. And sawmills just started popping up everywhere to harvest this wood and treat it, make lumber, make paper, and these sawmills were just, everywhere. They were everywhere. Now, on the tail end of all this logging came just absolutely uncontrolled wildfires, soil erosion, flooding. It just left a huge impact on the forest, because you think about what these people are doing, right? They're going out, they're collecting timber, they're taking as much wood as they possibly can. All of these trees, all the ones that are standing, they're cutting them down completely at the stump, cutting off the tops of the trees, and sending them down the river to the logging mill. And what did this leave for the landscape? It just left a bunch of dead tree tops and dead stumps. Created a huge fire hazard whenever all of this stuff dried up. It could easily be sparked by the railroad coming through, a train coming through, throwing off sparks, setting it on fire, and it was just a huge hazard and a huge erosion issue. And someone kind of realized that something needed to be done here. The state's north central region actually became known as Pennsylvania's desert. And that's whenever these visionary leaders and active citizens worked to protect and restore this land. And through those efforts that, those people had the foresight of seeing, hey, this is not sustainable, we need to do something about it. Those 12 counties in Pennsylvania that were recently called Pennsylvania's desert are now called Pennsylvania's wilds, and are some of the most wild, remote, and rugged areas in the entire state. Now let's head back to the actual start of these protection acts. This was spurred by the 1989 flood in Johnstown that actually took the lives of 2,200 people. Governor James Beaver recognized the need to adopt land use policies. He understood that, hey, not sustainable. We need to kind of figure something out here. And as timber companies abandoned land, they often failed to pay any taxes, and formerly forested areas came up for tax sale, very, very frequently. Whenever this would happen, the state began to purchase some of these for watershed protection, and around the same period, citizens were organizing to protect, study, and care for these forests. So, everyone was kind of taking part in this. The government, the citizens, everyone knew that this was a huge priority and they needed to take action. A bill signed in 1893 by Governor Robert Patson formed the PA Forestry Commission. This was tasked with the control of forest fires and establishing a forest reserve system, so what we now know as the Pennsylvania State Forest System. The system began with the purchase of 7,500 acres in Clinton County to be used to furnish timber, protect the water supply of Young Woman's Creek, and provide recreation for citizens. Joseph Rothrock, which is probably familiar to a lot of these Pennsylvanians that use these state forests, Rothrock State Forest, it's out in central Pennsylvania. He's actually the father of Pennsylvania forestry and the first president of the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. He was appointed the first commissioner of forestry in 1895, and Rothrock really prioritized the ideas of conservation, recreation, and health for these forest systems. The industrial and economic growth of the 19th century actually gave Americans far more time and disposable income to enjoy leisure activities that Pennsylvania had to offer through these forest systems. So hunting and fishing and hiking and things like that. They could actually enjoy themselves out there instead of being specifically subsistence living farmers, utilizers of land. Now, this is whenever Gifford Pinchot became the president of Pennsylvania in 1922. I'm sorry, the governor of Pennsylvania in 1922. Pinchot was well known as the father of conservation for his work while in the U.S. Forest Service, and has been hailed for his road program in Pennsylvania. Now, all of these guys were absolutely pivotal in making sure that this forest system happened and it stayed intact. And I just don't even know where we would be at today, probably in a far worse spot, because I've said this stat many times before, but I believe it's close to around like 20 to 40% of all fresh water comes from U.S. Forest Service land, and that's not even including the public land that states hold. That is only including the Forest Service land, so national forest. And Pennsylvania does have a national forest, and that's included in that water kind of survey right there. But what we also got to take into consideration is that Pennsylvania has far more state forests than they do national forests. And I can't even imagine the amount of fresh water that's coming from these state forests and even the state parks that we're talking about right now. So public land is just absolutely crucial for the health of our ecosystems, for our clean water, for animals to have habitat, for food production. All of that stuff it's just so critical. And for these guys to have the foresight to think like, hey, like this is not sustainable. You know, we have these wildfires. We have all of these issues coming from logging. We need to take better care of our forests. And that doesn't mean that we just completely stop utilizing the continuously regrowing forest. We stop utilizing that renewable resource that we have in wood. I mean, that's a huge export of Pennsylvania, but we just need to manage it properly and more effectively. You know, only cutting down certain tracts of land at a time, letting it regrow, and then cutting it down again at a later date. It's super imperative for, you know, all of these environmental protections to like kind of stop what we're doing right now and really take care of nature, because that's, you know, it's what takes care of us. So being able to have the foresight to do that is super crucial, and also to allow people to go out there and hunt and fish and do whatever they really want out there. I mean, right now, besides federally designated land, federally owned land, the Pennsylvania State Forest has the leanest guidelines for any sort of rules or regulations whenever you're going out there. And I'm not talking about like poaching or things like that. I'm talking about camping. You know, state parks, you're not allowed to just go out there and camp. State forests, anywhere in a state forest, minus a couple things like within like 100 feet of a road or something like that, and a couple other rules, you can go anywhere for a night and just camp. You know, just camp out in the middle of the woods. As long as the fire risk's low and things like that, you can make fires out there. You can make your shelter out there. You could harvest dead wood for your house to burn at your house. It really is amazing what the Pennsylvania State Forest provides us as hunters. And I just wanted to take the time today to really share with you guys where that's coming from and why I love it so much, because it's such a huge part of my life right now, just because of the way that I like to hunt and the way that I like to go out and enjoy public land and be as far away from people as possible. It's really, really awesome, and I'm very, very thankful that we have it. And I hope you guys are too, and I hope you guys go out there and enjoy it sometime soon, because it is truly amazing, and you can find some really, really awesome spots there in the Pennsylvania State Forest. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And again, I really hope that you guys kind of pick something up here, in that you'll go out there and enjoy the state forest for yourself. Have a good rest of the week for everyone. Again, make sure to check out that video of Connor and I camping. It's going to be a good one. We cooked up some food on the fire. It was absolutely great. Again, I look forward to seeing you then on Friday. And everyone, make sure to keep it wild.